Today I want to talk about that idea we get into our heads of the perfect card. Often we end up getting something we weren't expecting, and instead of seeing the beauty in it or acknowledging what we've learned, all we see is what we didn't get. I haven't used my alcohol inks in a while, and I wondered if there's a way to use them without Yupo paper. I went to YouTube and I found a whole bunch of videos talking about using them on the gel plate. The beauty of alcohol inks is how they move, which they won't do on regular paper. So using them on a gel plate, which is non-porous, should help with that. One of the videos I found was this technique that Tiffany shared in a live a while back. She got some really gorgeous results, so I sat down and I watched it in detail. Tiffany used hand sanitizer and alcohol lifting. I don't have alcohol lifting, but I was just dying to give this a try, so I didn't let that stop me. So here's my gel plate. You can see that it's stained, and that's from previous sessions with my alcohol inks, but it doesn't seem to impact its performance with my ink pads or my acrylic paints. And here's my hand sanitizer. I keep these little bottles in my craft room to help me clean my glass mat, and I love the scent of this one. It's called Winter, but I think any hand sanitizer will do. Once I brayered it out, I added a few drops of my 3 colors, dandelion, citrus, and a bit of watermelon. I want to create some fall leaves with this panel, so the mix of these 3 colors should give me some nice warm oranges and browns. I brayered them out a bit, and then I felt like I should wait until it dried. Here's where Tiffany added a stencil in her process, but I decided rather than doing that or waiting for it to dry, which would mean I would need something, either white paint or the alcohol lifting, to lift the print, I just put my index paper down on it while it was still wet. That's okay. I don't love it, and I think it can be the good beginning of something. I can see white areas where I didn't spread the ink, so I just repeated the whole thing again. I added more hand sanitizer, and you don't need a lot, and then some more of my colored alcohol inks, and then I took my print. That's better. I think it's interesting how the colors are not really blending together, maybe because of how I was brayering them. Obviously, they won't move on this paper like they would on Yupo. And looking at this now, I wish I had done a 3rd layer to get some more depth and interest from the overlap. But I stopped here. It's definitely not like Tiffany's, but I can't really expect that, can I? Since I cut out 2 of her steps. But then I wondered if I even really needed the hand sanitizer. So I tried it again with the same 3 alcohol ink colors directly on the gel plate. To be fair, there's probably still a little bit of the sanitizer on my brayer. And when I pulled the print, I got a pretty similar looking result. Interesting. As I did with the first panel, I added another layer of ink to this one, again with no new hand sanitizer, and I did another pull, and yes, I got a similar result. Then I did a 3rd one. What's that quote about insanity? Something about trying the same thing over and over again and expecting or hoping for a different result? Then I thought, well, maybe I had missed out by not using a stencil like Tiffany did. So I added more ink to the gel plate, put down my simple Mosaic stencil from a Colorful Life Designs, and I used a new panel to pull the color off the plate. I don't know why I didn't use one of the 3 panels. I was experimenting and it's easy to be all judgy about it now, but here we go. Here's the pull after I had removed the stencil. And it's a nice little touch of subtle texture and pattern. Then I repeated it. This time I did use one of the panels to remove the ink while the stencil was still on. At least I'm learning as I go. So this one has a reverse pattern, and then I used the 3rd panel to pick up what was left on the gel plate. So here's the 3 panels, and I think that while they're not really like Tiffany's, they are pretty and they're definitely usable for fall cards. My next little experiment was to splatter some alcohol over top of the panels to see if the splatters would be visible. Again, it's quite different from how it would be on Yupo because it immediately soaks right in, but I did kind of bleach out some of the areas a bit like using water on my Catherine Pooler inks. And speaking of my inks, one thing I wouldn't be able to do on Yupo is stamp with these inks. I grabbed this background stamp from my favorite things and I inked it up with some sauna ink before stamping it down onto one of the panels, and that added even more texture and interest. Next, I added some splatter with this coppery color from my Altenew metallic watercolors. I trimmed the panel down with a frame die from Pigment Craft Company, and I'll show you that in a sec. To assemble the card, I wanted to create a dark brown mat, and since my gel plate was still sitting on my desk, I used that. It's probably quicker to go direct to paper with the ink, but since you need to put 2 or 3 layers of ink to get it really saturated on the gel plate, that gives you an option of using a lighter version of your color. I used my brayer to try and blend the ink just in case there were any edge marks left by the ink pad, and I did 2 layers, and then I went back and added a third for a really deep dark color, since I want a really big contrast to show through the holes in the frame. Now I really want my alcohol panel to be the star of the show here, so to add some leaves in my sentiment, I chose some vellum and a honey gold cardstock. The waffle flower leaves have an outline die as well as a solid one, and to match that thin, elegant outline, I chose the Simon Says Stamp Thanks die, and I used my Barely Art liquid glue to glue them together. It's really nice because with the precision tip, I can get really small drops of glue on the narrow lines of these die cuts. We all know that working with vellum, the biggest problem is trying to adhere it. On this double leaf, my first drop of glue was big and it looked like it was going to be squishy. So when I finished putting glue on the back, I tapped it onto a piece of scrap paper to get the excess off before attaching it to the vellum. I trimmed the dark brown panel just slightly smaller than my alcohol ink panel, and normally I would cut a rectangle out of the center to use later. But this time, because the colored panel is only index cardstock, which is pretty thin, I want the thickness and stability from the hammer mount cardstock that I used on the backer. I used liquid glue again, avoiding the holes where that darker panel will show through. Next, I glued the sentiment and leaves onto the orange panel by putting liquid glue behind the areas of the die cuts where the gold cardstock was. Again, I used really small dots because I didn't want any of that glue squishing out and becoming visible behind the vellum. I glued the panel to a craft card base, and then finally I added some sparkle with some red illusion gems from Crafty Meraki. These gems flash yellow, green, and red depending on the angle you're looking at them, and they are the perfect finishing touch for this autumn card. Then I took my photos. It's so pretty from this angle, right? The gold is shiny and, oh no, it's not so legible when we look at it now. I decided to cut a couple more of the thanks word, and first put one of them on the card, just white, to see if that was the answer. Nope. I love white on my cards, but there's no other white on this one, so it just looks out of place. So then I used my ink pads to make one the same color of brown as the background, and one red, since I felt like all my alcohol inks had ended up kind of orange. When I do this, I like to put the ink on the front and the back of the die cut so there's no white edges showing. I put the brown on the card first, and I felt pretty sure that that's the way I was going, especially since it ties in so nicely with that die cut frame. But I tried the red as well, just to be sure. Which way would you have gone? Let me know in the comments below. Today's card was inspired by this card made by Lindsay, a crafty friend that we lost last year to ovarian cancer. September is Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, and today I'm part of a blog hop and Instagram hop to remember her. If you're interested in learning more about how you can get involved in raising some funds to fight this horrible disease, or just seeing some more cards made in her honor, please use the link in the description below to head to my blog and hop along. I hope I've shown that things that don't always turn out the way we thought can still be used to make beautiful cards. It's all about trying things out and building on our experience and knowledge. Don't let your search for perfection get in the way of your progress. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.